Saka,
This meeting is being recorded.
Who is Michael's editor at Anderson Press, and would just like to say a few words before we start.
Lovely. Oh, well, welcome everyone. So yes, my name is Chloe Saka. I'm commissioning editor at Anderson Press, and we're so delighted to be publishing another fabulously funny book written by Michael with wonderful illustrations by Tony Ross, Rigatoni the Pasta Cat. As I'm sure Michael will tell you more about, this is a book that he wrote while recovering in hospital from COVID. And it was actually a big surprise when the manuscript turned up in my email inbox. Like everyone, I'd been worrying about Michael for those past few months and hoping he'd get well soon. So I certainly didn't expect him to be writing when he'd been so ill. Little did I know that his mind was bubbling over with stories while he was getting better. And this story, Rigatoni the Pasta Cat, was one of the first things he got down. So we're so pleased to have yet another one of Michael's funny stories to put into the hands of young readers. And I really hope that you all love it as much as we do. And when you get your copy, do by all means enjoy it. It's to read aloud, but also just to look at the fantastic illustrations that Tony has drawn to complement Michael's brilliant text. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Chloe. Well, let's just get Michael into the spotlight. There we go. And I might join you just for a minute. There we go. I should be side by side with you now, which is lovely, being side by side with you. I just want to pick up on what Chloe said. This enormous sort of energetic, I think we were all amazed by your energetic creativity after coming out of such a terrible place. Was it being ill that kind of generated that?
Well, you've got to think of me lying in bed, first of all, coming out of a coma. I don't know how many of you have done that. It's quite an odd experience, whether you were knocked out by a boxer or some terrible accident, or in my case, an induced coma, if any of you have experienced that. It's a slow transition. In fact, we don't really have a word for it because we say conscious and unconscious, or in a coma or out of a coma, as if somehow or other you go ka-chung and you snap out of it as you might snap out of a faint. But it isn't like that. There are at least 10, 20 days where you might be woozy, delirious, hallucinating. And then after that, there's a period where you think you know what's going on, but it quickly becomes apparent that you don't, because you've either forgotten what somebody said to you the day before, or you're just confused, or confused about being confused. So that, in my case, lasted for maybe, I think possibly in all about 2, possibly 3 months even. But in that period, I was both in a ward in the hospital. As it happens, it was a ward for what do they call us? Very old people. Anyway, I know the word for it. So I was either old or coming out of a coma, or both. Anyway, and then I was in a rehabilitation hospital for 3 weeks. When I was in the rehab hospital, I was much more aware and thinking I was quite sane. And I lay in bed thinking of the plot of Rigatoni the Pasta Cat. And the basic thing about this story is that there's a cat who wants pasta and can't have it. And of course, I thought this was all about the cat who wanted pasta, you know, that's what it was about. But then, of course, after I'd written it, I realized that secretly it was actually about me lying in bed in hospital wanting hummus. But I didn't write Michael the Hummus Man. I wrote Rigatoni the Pasta Cat. But this is what writers do, don't we? We move things sideways and make one thing representative of another. And it's really one of the interesting things when we do stories with children and poems and plays, and we want to nudge them towards the idea that maybe the rose in the play isn't just a rose, maybe it's something else, or maybe that moment when the thunderstorm happens, that it means something beyond a thunderstorm. I do a poem that's got the line "don't drown" in it, and before I read it to the children, I say this poem is not about drowning, and then we all do the poem about not drowning, about drowning. Yes. So that's how it came about. I think I was yearning for hummus.
Now this poor cat, Rigatoni, I mean, he has two wonderful owners that know exactly what he wants, but sadly they have to go away to care for a sick relative, and he's left in the care of somebody who doesn't know what he wants. He has to go out and find it for himself.
Yes, I mean, it was a bit remiss of them not to tell the boy who comes to bring him the cat food. The cat food, by the way, is called Good Muse.
I love it.
Sorry about that. They have to leave her in one or two bad jokes, don't we? So Good Muse that he keeps bringing, and it's not that Rigatoni hates it, it's just that he doesn't love it, whereas he loves pasta. And of course, by the way, we have to put in a health warning here. Do not feed your real live cats pasta. It's not good for them. Mind you, I've found out talking to vets, nothing is good for cats. Basically, they're supposed to kind of hardly eat, apart from a bit of grass and about a mouse once a week. But we give them much too much food. But there we are. That's what we do. Anyway,
like lions, then.
Yeah,
like lions, they don't eat often.
I had a lovely cat who loved broccoli, by the way. I've never had another cat who did, but Tiggs. Tiggs actually occurs in another story. Yes, Tiggs love broccoli. But anyway, Rigatoni, as the name suggests, does love pasta.
So I was just going to say, the next time that I actually meet you face to face, I'll bring a bowl of hummus. And maybe next time you write a story, you could write one about Garibaldi the biscuit cat, just for me.
Well, I did once write a story about Garibaldi biscuits. I did. It's long since disappeared. But I do actually, Chloe doesn't know this, I have already sketched in my head another story which features, in actual fact, a poppadom that disappears. But there we are. I don't want to give anything away. I have already. Goodness me. But anyway, yes.
Michael, I wanted to talk before. I know you're going to do a reading from this book for us. I want to talk a little bit about story. And I know you really believe that story is very important. And I thought I'd just share with you an anecdote. I'm sorry to anybody that's heard me talk about this before, but when my son was starting school, you can imagine, because of the work that I do, he'd been immersed in stories that were told, stories that were read, picture books hanging around. And he went off to school and he was given his kind of reading bag to come home. And his first book was one called Roger Red Hat. It was from the village of Three Corners. And it started like this: Roger Red Hat. Here is Roger Red Hat. Roger's hat. Here is Roger's hat. Roger's hat is red. That's the first 2 or 3 pages. And he suddenly wasn't that interested in reading. And I said, what's the matter? And he said, there's pages missing in this book. And I said, I don't think there are, because they're big bold page numbers at the bottom. I said, I don't think there are, let's count them. And he looked at me and he said, well, where's the story gone then?
Very good.
Which I thought was, I actually put it in the reading record book. Alex says, where's the story? Can we have a story next time? But the teacher never talked to me again after. Anyway, as a serious point here, I wanted to ask you, what do you think makes a good story for this age group that you're writing for here?
Quite a few ingredients, and people might like to add more, but I think a story certainly for young people, probably has to have what I call hooks. That's to say, one hook is the hook that pulls you through, the one that makes you want to know what's going to happen next, how people are going to react next. So that's a big hook. And often that relies on a process called reveal conceal. So with reveal conceal, basically what any writer does is they throw down clues, which makes a reader want to go, I think I get what might happen, but I wonder whether it will. Or, I know what's going to happen. Oh, no, hang on, I don't. Any of those things. I mean, if you just simply say, she walked past the house, looked up at the top window and wondered what was going on, That's a classic reveal conceal. The writer is actually cheating. The writer knows what's going on in there because the writer's going to tell you a few pages down the line. But in order to get the reader to wonder, you wonder with the eyes of the person looking. It's classic Hitchcock in films. You see the person's face, you flash to somewhere and you think, why are we looking at that? And you go, what am I looking for? Hitchcock does it all the time. Writers have been doing it for centuries. Anytime somebody is wondering or thinking, anytime there's a mystery, and you can lay down mysteries in a whole variety of ways, and of course problems, dilemmas, pratfalls, pitfalls, how you're going to get out of it. There's hundreds of reveal conceals that writers have up their sleeve, and these are what I call hooks as well, hooks that pull you through a story. But there are others as well, of course. I mean, if we think of a story as ideas and feelings attached to beings that we recognize and come to care about, and then events take place of one sort or another, then that one thing I just said there, that you have to care about the beings. Otherwise, why are you going to read? You can hate them, like them, wonder about them, be envious of them, any of those feelings, but you do have to have some sort of reason to care. So if you think famously of Macbeth, he's horrible. But for some reason or another, Shakespeare gets us to care about Macbeth. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. You get to the end of the play and go, why did I care about that horrible bloke? And that's lovely. That's clever writing, obviously, need I say. But that's so you have to have that caring element. You also have to have a whole set of other things going on, like contrasts and patterns. And I'm very interested, as you might have guessed, in humor. So can you surprise people? Humor often turns on surprise, on mistakes that happen, things that you predict that will happen but don't. And so you want to play around with some of those because that gets people giggling, and that's quite nice. And it's also quite nice to play to a reader's sense of superiority, that you reveal things where the reader goes, oh no, why did they do that? Because you, the reader, you know much better. You wouldn't have done that, but your pratfalling protagonist does. So that's another ingredient that's very useful as well.
So the character that we care deeply about in this story is a cat, Rigatoni. Would you read a little bit to us?
Yes. What should we do? Should we read from the beginning? So
yes, let's have the beginning. Let's set it up for everybody.
Yes. So Rigatoni loved pasta. Rigatoni was a cat. Rigatoni was a cat who loved pasta. He loved spaghetti. He loved penne. He loved fusilli. He loved linguine. He loved zitti. He loved vermicelli. Rigatoni loved pasta. He loved any kind of pasta, no matter how it was served up, with pesto, in soup, in lasagna, in cannelloni, with tomato sauce, any whichever way he got it. Rigatoni was very lucky. He was looked after by Ruth and Tina. They made sure that Rigatoni got some spaghetti, penne, fusilli, linguine, zitti or vermicelli every day, at least once every day. If by some tiny chance, come 5 o'clock, Ruth or Tina hadn't remembered Rigatoni's pasta, Rigatoni had a special pasta meow to remind them. It was longer and deeper, as if he was saying, pasta. And when Rigatoni said, pasta, either Ruth or Tina jumped to it and quickly put some pasta on the stove. Then they dished it up in Rigatoni's special pasta dish. They would listen to Rigatoni making noises that meant he was loving it. Pasta. This is how it was, day after day in Rigatoni's home and his favourite place, on the cushion, on the sofa, until what? Until one day, Ruth and Tina had to go away. Oh no. End of chapter 1.
Yes.
So there you've got topic, reveal, conceal. Oh no, which is actually a bit of a lift from Commedia dell'arte, you'll be pleased to know. Commedia dell'arte often has that little sort of cliffhanger in it where you go, oh no, oh what? I don't know. and then they try and solve the problem. So I
Yeah.
lifted that from Commedia dell'arte.
You know, I so admire your writing. There's so much going on here that wouldn't be immediately obvious to a reader. You're just enjoying the story, but it is so very well crafted. And listening to you read really makes the point that these stories read aloud so well. I know you're a particularly good reader, but I think they're written in a way that supports an adult or reading to a child, or a child that might be reading them aloud themselves. Is that something that you're very conscious of when you're writing?
Yes, and Chloe and I have talked a bit about it. Yes, that is precisely. I'm trying something, and there's an oxymoron coming up now, a kind of oral writing. So anybody who writes film scripts and plays, you're very familiar with this. You're writing words down on a page in your script that you know an actor is going to perform. We've had 300-400 years of writing stories in books that we sometimes think are not meant for performance. We sit on our own and read to ourselves. But I know that these books find their ways into the hands of teachers, librarians, parents, grandparents, or indeed children reading to each other, siblings reading to each other. I wanted them to be like scripts, more like scripts, so that you've got these kind of questions and then answering the questions and exclamations and so on, so that the reader out loud can have some fun, but also the reader reading to themselves. I mean, you can read to yourself in an oral voice or in a written voice. It just depends what it's like. You know, if you, after all, whether we do GCSE English, we read Shakespeare to ourselves or read a play. You know, my children all seem to do The Inspector Calls. You know, you have to read it to yourself as if they're speaking it. So it's just, we tend not to see it very much in storybooks, but there's no reason why not. Yeah.
Easier, of course, if you have had it read aloud first, because then you've got that internal voice.
Yes, that's right. I mean, we talk a lot about learning to read, and you know, there's a lot of talk obviously about phonics, reading for meaning, all that sort of thing. But in actual fact, the issue of voice is quite often neglected. I mean, if you think you've put yourself into the shoes of a 5, 6, 7-year-old, it is pretty mysterious, isn't it? And here we go about talking to ourselves, or indeed grunting to each other. It's quite a good way of communicating. Most of us do it at breakfast with our teenage children. And we communicate, and we just do it. And then we come to a book, and it hasn't got a voice. I mean, it is pretty odd, isn't it? You know, unless you press a button, as you know, our kids do with the computer, and make words on pages speak. Alternatively, we speak and then print comes up, you know, and they're all used to making subtitles now with these AI methods and so on. But this thing, it hasn't got a voice. So, you know, in a way, anything that a writer can do that can help a reader give a voice, or encourage them indeed to come up with a voice. You know, that's what I've got the whole pasta joke about. It's, you know, sounds like pasta. I mean, almost inviting a child to go pasta, to experiment, you know, to do better than me, if you like, you know, see whether you can come up with a meow that sounds like pasta and a pasta that sounds like a meow. It's quite an interesting challenge, isn't it?
I mean, you also have the characters' thoughts in there. I think they're italicized in this book. So, you know, when Rigatoni goes into his kind of internal monologue, I guess you've got that going on too.
And there is a posh word for that. That's known as free indirect discourse.
Yes, indeed.
Or FID. And dare I say, you know, we owe it to Ms. Jane Austen for perhaps being one of the first great writers to use it. Others possibly had, but she was the one who took us into the minds of protagonists without telling us that that's what she was doing. So instead of saying she thought or she wondered, you just go straight in. What if this? And if she could do that. So it's not even I, it's even in that third person voice. So it's a very strange, dislocated internal thing. And it has that nice posh name, free indirect discourse, which quite often ticks away in the back of my mind. Shall I do some FID now? Yes, why don't I? I know that sounds very kind of brutal and mechanistic, but it's a nice thing. And one of the most famous FIDs of all is Madame Bovary. So she's certainly pumping away there. We get lots of thoughts from Mother Emma Bovary, thanks to Gustave Flaubert.
I want to mention Margaret Meek here, because Margaret taught us that the books that we read when we're young are the ones that take you on to the kinds of stories that you're talking about there, whether it's picture books. And that is really why I admire this writing so much, because it is accessible, but it's all of those complex things.
Yes, I mean, we kind of get it wrong in common speech about what children's books are. The point is that it's very easy to look down as we're adults and say, that's a simple book, or that's a silly book, or that's, oh, I know what's going to happen next, or all sorts of things we might say. But what you have to do really is try very hard to think from the point of view of a child for whom the very idea of story and all these tropes and motifs and symbols and the rest of it that are familiar to us are really slightly mysterious to children. I mean, as they get older, then they start uncovering them and become familiar with it. But, you know, if we take Enid Blyton, for example, it's just one case. You know, her famous 5 Secret 7 stories, I mean, they are, in fact, sort of detective stories. So we sit there watching, you know, at night, I know I do, some of these police mysteries and things. But actually, our means to decode them has depended largely on the fact that at any age between the age of 5 and 15, let's say, we were introduced to juvenile forms of that. And I just take that as one example, that really we're learning how to decode the methods of literature in general. I mean, you know, we say rags to riches. There you go. We say rags to riches. So what's the most famous rags to riches story of all? Is Cinderella. By the time we're 10, we'll have come across at least 4 or 5 versions of Cinderella, rags to riches stories, biographies of people who started out poor and became rich. So whether it's non-fiction or fiction, or watching a film on telly, or indeed one of the versions of Cinderella. And that then becomes something that we can then decode. You know, is poor, or if it's reversed and there's somebody who's rich and then they, as it were, reverse and then they come back down to earth or something in some way or another, we are in fact reading it with the texts that we read before. I mean, the posh word for that is intertextuality. We read with intertextuality, with that sort of that repertoire of text, as it's called, just like you get a repertoire of plays on in a theatre, then you have a repertoire of text in your head. So you then read with that. I mean, you only have to watch Gogglebox and you can see the people reading. They're going, oh, I know what's, no, that's the one. He's the one who's going to do it. Any of that stuff. What they're doing is reading with the text in their head. Sometimes think of reading as just reading, as if it's a sort of transparent decoding or unwrapping, but in fact it's many layered with the readings that we've had. So going all the way back to that issue for children, these things that are simple are in actual fact, I don't know what other metaphor you want to use, but they are in fact the beginnings of creating these repertoires that last you for the rest of your life.
I want to talk a little bit about language as well. It's part of voice, you know, and the natural language that you use, but there's a lot of patterning in this text. And I'm thinking back to the Roger Red Hat that I wrote at the beginning, where you've got lots of repetition in the story. Here we've got lots of patterning and repetition, beginnings of paragraphs that start with the same words. We've got, you know, the pasta and this lovely list of pastas that you just want to get your tongue round, and that's repeated throughout, you know, the beginnings and ends of stories. This is the poet in you at work as well, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, I think it is, you know, obviously I'm always thinking, when I'm writing poems, I am thinking very consciously of patterns. And the thing about stories is that you've got many voices to write with in a story. You might have lulls where you're maybe taking us just down a river nice and gently. There may be bump, 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 cut and thrust of dialogue, which will be nothing like that at all. When we go, as we've said, we can have interior the person's mind, and you hear that stream of consciousness thing. You can have rhetorical questions. You can have wry asides from the narrator. Famously in with Roald Dahl, he does that, or indeed Emil and the Detectives. and you can have all sorts of cameos and so on. So you've got a whole variety of voices. So the patterning in stories and novels is a bit different from poems, because you've got the pattern within the poem and then that's it. Whereas with a novel, you could have a patterning on a paragraph, a patterning on a page, or patterning across a chapter. And you may also have an arc of patterning across a whole book where, let's say a book like Catch-22 or something, where the repetition of the missions that they have to go on and whether they'll fulfill the missions and so on, it sort of makes a pattern all the way through the book and ends up with a kind of big eye. Yes, patterning is very important, and I have in mind, it goes back to that orality thing. It goes back to the idea that I want the children to enjoy some rhythms, to play around with those. Yes, I think that helps them. Children, you think they live in probably a world that's more oral than adults. That's a huge generalization, but because obviously they soon get reading when they've got phones and computers and so on. But for more, I'm guessing it would be interesting to do it almost mathematically, but certainly 3, 4, 5, and 6-year-olds are largely oral beings. They are largely just talking and listening when it comes to language. Zoom call, we're all spending a lot of time reading and so on. And of course, the children, even when it's not talking and listening, they might be watching telly and stuff, which is an oral form, even though the stuff that's being said may not be entirely oral, and they might be reading scripts, but they're perceiving it as oral. And children's telly, of course, oral. So it's a very oral world. So it's quite nice to write books that, in a sense, overlap with that oral world while being words on the page.
I will say, for anybody that's going to read the whole series, because it is loosely a series, isn't it? And
yes, it's a growing series. Thanks to one
growing series. There are, if you were to read them in the order in which they're read, there are some sort of shifts, because you've got more of what you might call the transferred storyteller in the earlier books, and then you kind of you can see a move towards this more oral writing in Barking for Bagels and Rigatoni the Pasta Cat. But I think it started with this one, isn't it? Which is Burping Buzzer. It hasn't got an animal in it.
No, that's right. So that was where I wrote that little story as a sort of parody of I don't know, the kind of books that are about Elvis Presley and things like that, kind of great stars who then sort of their lives end in misadventure of some sort or another. And I kind of wrote it as a sort of jokey parallel to sort of help children decode these super star stories that, I thought it would be fun for them to have a story that kind of decodes, a sort of parody, if you like. But we soon got on to animals, and so we've had a bee and had a fish that farts.
Just show they are Bilal's bee.
Yeah, we've had a hamster who's called Hampstead, and we've had several cats. I've sort of my leaning towards cats is betray. Yes, that's right. Don't forget to yes.
And dogs. You've got 2 cats and 2 dogs.
Oh, right. Yes. Choosing Crumble is a dog. What? Oh, yes. And Barking for Bagels is a dog, isn't it? Yes, that's right. Those 2. Yes, indeed. Choosing Crumble, actually, if I just say, that came about, I do this program, Word of Mouth, on Radio 4. And I had to interview someone about the language. This dog trainer. She got me to pretend to be a dog, I think this is what it was. And I had to say to this woman what it was that I liked. So I think somewhere it exists in the BBC archive, and I was sitting there going, well, I really like to lie down in my basket. And then she said something like, what else do you like? And I said, oh, I love it when you come over to my basket. And she went, no, you don't. I said, don't I? And she said, no, dogs, when they're in their basket, they don't like to be disturbed. So this went on. And then the more she went on, I thought, wow, what a great idea. The dog can say, can be interviewed by this young child, interviewing the dog as to what it wants. So that was actually, yes, the start for that one, where I had to pretend to be a dog. I think we switched it. She became the dog, that's right. And then I had to say, well, I can tell you, I'm not really very fast at running. And then I remember her saying, neither am I. I'm not the kind of dog that runs very much or something. And I went, really? I thought all dogs run. Anyway, so that was a very...
missed that episode. I listened to it regularly and I missed that episode.
Well, it was the origin of choosing crumble. Yes.
Actually, it's a theme that crops up in a number of the books, animals trying to communicate what they want. Hampstead the hamster, he's trying to communicate what he wants.
I know, it's nearly a tragedy, but a tragedy is averted. Another great reveal conceal of hearing a tragedy. Hampstead the hamster is not thriving. It's a present for Christmas Day, and he isn't thriving at all. He's sort of fading out, and feels like we are heading for Rosen's first tragedy, and it's very worrying. But what's amazing is how the hamster is able to communicate, and I can't give this away, so no spoilers. Is able to communicate, and the people involved, the son and the dad, are very good at intuiting what a hamster wants. They're very good at reading a hamster. And so I thought that was those kinds of things, I think, enable children to experience vicariously what they experience themselves, which is they have all sorts of feelings, which they find it very difficult to communicate. Isn't it obvious that I'm unhappy that Mum isn't here today? I'm not going to sit here and go, I'm unhappy that Mum's not here. In fact, what I'm going to do is kick the table leg. And if you ask me why am I kicking the table leg, I'll say because I want to, or I don't know. And then you're supposed to read it. And of course, we go on doing this sort of thing through adult life, don't we? We know we do that. But children, and sometimes they don't know the words to say their feelings. So I've tapped into that, hoping that children will sort of be both the child and the animal. That's the advantage of having a child and an animal in a story. You give the child reader a dual role. Yeah. They can be the animal, and then they can be the child caring for the child. So they can do both. They can switch. And that's, that actually enables a child to be empathetic with their carer, with their parent. Because, the caring child in a book is equivalent to the caring adult in their lives. Enable the child to put themselves in other shoes like that. And you can, I think that's quite an important way in which stories involving animals and child carers, the way they work, it actually enables them to sort of play, how can I put it? Oh, I know. Do you remember when we had to sing Psalm 23, Crimond?
Yes, well, that's the Lord's my shepherd.
Lord's my shepherd, that's it. Well, I remember that at school, and we sang Lord's my shepherd, and then they said, descants, here's the harmony. And then they told us, which was really scary for me, listen to the harmony. I remember thinking, you what? Listen to the harmony. I've got enough trouble listening to the Lord's my shepherd. Never mind about the Lord's my shepherd. Up there, I can't listen to that. And if I do, I'll go off. The story like this with double header, it's actually asking you to listen to the harmony. So think next time you do that, you can think of the descant of the Lord's my shepherd. Psalm 23.
Absolutely fascinating. I suppose I'm just going to say to people who are in the audience, I know you're listening intently. Please feel free to put some questions in the Q&A, because I'm going to come to those in a moment. I can see that there's one in there, but please do post questions for Michael there. I did just want to say that maybe, in Fluff the Farting Fish,
yes,
you're sort of playing that where the child actually does become the fish at the end of that story. Well, she doesn't become the fish, but she takes on the fish's attributes at the end, or tries to.
Do you think you'll be able to learn how to do ... And of course, you just hope as a reader. Well, I hope that she will. I mean, it's the final reveal conceal, isn't it? Where in fact nothing is concealed, but you, the reader, write on. And if you're a teacher or librarian, you could say, well, Michael Rosen's basically asking us to write the next story. So come on, let's do it. Let's write what LV does next. You know, there was a famous book called What Katie Does and What Katie Does Next. So why not do that? And I often think, you know, a great starting point for all stories are sequels and prequels. So either write what story that comes before or write a story that comes after. And that was meant to be a kind of, go on then, write your own.
Maybe we could have another reading, Michael. Very different in tone, you know, Hampstead or Hampstead, the hamster is very different in tone. It'd be nice to hear some of that.
Okay, so more than anything else in the world, Leo wanted a hamster. He knew that a hamster would make him happier than a fried egg. What? Fried eggs aren't happy. Ah, but Leo always thought that fried eggs are happy. He loved to hear the sound of an egg frying in the pan. Zizzle, zizzle, zizzle went the egg. And to him, that sounded like the happiest sound in the world. So Leo wanted a hamster so that he could be as happy as a fried egg. Not long ago, he wasn't very happy. He had been sad. But if he got a hamster, he would be for certain. Now, the big question was whether he would get one. Christmas was coming, and Dad said it was time to draw up his wish list. Yes, said Leo, I'll do that, but how will Father Christmas see the list? Well, said Dad, we have ways of letting Father Christmas know. And he winked. Thought Leo to himself. Did that wink mean that Dad did know how to get in touch with Father Christmas? Or he didn't and was just making it up? It's always hard to know with Dad. I could write to him, said Leo. I'm good at getting good at writing. Or you could text him on my phone, said Dad. Wow, have you got his number? Said Leo. Let me see, Dad said. Contacts, A, B, C, D, E, Famous Five. What? You know the Famous Five? Yep. Still clicking through his contacts list. Fantastic Mr. Fox. What? Said Leo. You know Fantastic Mr. Fox from Roald Dahl's book? Yep, said Dad. I know a lot more people than you know about Lee-wee. Lee-wee is what Dad had called Leo ever since he was very small. And Leo was okay about him calling him that at home, but he was forbidden, absolutely forbidden, from calling him that in front of his friends. Ah, yes, here we are, Father Christmas. Right, what you need to do is tap in your list and I'll text him. This was exciting stuff. Leo had written out a list on a piece of paper, so when Dad handed him his phone, he could copy it in. Leo hadn't spelt everything exactly right, but spell check sorted out most of these. Sock spelt S-O-X came out as S-O-C-K-S, socks, that was good. Spider-Man outfit came out as Spider-Man outfit, that was good. Chocolates didn't come out as chocolates, which is what Leo meant, but came out as choke bits. So they had to sort that one out. Then Leo tapped in hamster, and it came out as Hampstead, which is a place in London. Hampstead, said Dad. You mean you want to go on a trip to Hampstead Heath, that huge park? No, 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 said Leo. I want a hamster. Right. Dad said, I'm not absolutely sure, but Father Christmas does hamsters. I mean, usually he does stuff that he and his helpers make. And then there's the sleigh whizzing through the sky. Would a hamster be happy up there? Not sure. Yeah, said Leo, getting a bit worried, but I can try. He didn't want to get that sad feeling again. Sure, Dad said, spotting that sad look on Leo's face. I'm just warning you in case you get disappointed. But Leo wasn't going to be put off. As he tapped in hamster with Dad's help and sent the text off to Father Christmas, he started feeling all fluttery inside, and he heard his own voice deep inside his head saying, I'm going to get a hamster, I'm going to get a hamster. And Leo pictured himself watching his hamster running about, kicking up the sawdust, nibbling bits of carrot, drinking water, and rushing to the edge of his little home to see Leo when he came back from school.
Oh, I love that. Chloe's just put that in the chat as well, about really loving the relationship between the dad and the son and that playfulness. I mean, for me, I love the ironic bit where, you know, the dad says, you know, maybe Father Christmas doesn't want a mince pie. Maybe he'd prefer is it a chocolate biscuit?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Father Christmas. Yeah, he quite often likes, in my house, Father Christmas has quite often liked very cold cider.
Has he?
Yeah, Father Christmas, let it be known. And the brandy, as it happens, not very much, but a nice cold cider, it's quite nice. Yeah.
I'll remember that. Cold cider and hummus for Father
Yeah.
Christmas next time.
Anyway, yes.
We've got quite a few audience questions here. So Will is going to help with the camera. And Will, I don't know if you can see the Q&A box, but we've got Rebecca Simpson-Hargreaves, then Christine Spain, and then Fiona Claxton. So Rebecca is first.
Okay, Rebecca. My son wants to know what inspired you to become a writer and a poet. I think.
Oh, look, I've got Rebecca here to ask her question, Michael.
Oh, Rebecca's come up.
You'd like to see her. She's going to put a camera on. So there you see, we can do it side by side for you.
Right.
I've got a background on, so you can't see my son, but he's sat right next to me, and the question is his. He's very excited. Oh, there you go. That's Oliver.
Oliver, twist. I bet you $5 you can't do this. Quick march over the arch. Oliver, twist. So Oliver, or Ollie, as we know you. Oliver inspired me. I guess it was my mum and my dad and my brother. My mum and dad, I don't know if you've ever heard of these. They had a very strange job. They were teachers. Have you ever heard of that?
Unfortunately, he suffers from the same thing with me. So yeah.
Oh no! Oh, it's agony, isn't it? Isn't it, Ollie? Yeah, that's right. Both mum and dad were teachers, and my brother actually, though he wasn't a teacher, I think he thought he ought to be. So whatever he found out, he thought that he had to teach me, and he's 4 years older than me. So he was trying to teach me like French when I was about 6, and he was trying to teach me like really scary maths when I was 11, and he would just he wouldn't stop as well. He would go, okay, Mick, it's dy over dx, dy by d2x, d2y, that's differentiate, and then you then integrate. And I'd be going, you what? Anyway, all three of them were very funny, told lots of lovely stories, did lots and lots of poems around the house. My mum was quite strange, actually. She'd be in the middle of talking or putting something away, and then she'd suddenly look up and go, tread softly, because you tread on my dreams. Now, what did I do with my hat? I just put it down here somewhere. And you go, Mum, what did you say then? She said, oh, it's a poem by W.B. Yeats. I love Yeats. And you go, right, okay, Mum. So that was one thing. And then my dad, he was teaching English at secondary school, and he would just go off on one. You know, I mentioned Macbeth earlier. You know, I used to go up the dump with my dad. That was an old builder's dump where he used to kind of collect old sinks. My dad collected old sinks. Anyway, he would go up there in the middle of like, Mick, would you just grab that? Would you, Mick? And he'd suddenly go, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day till the last syllable of recorded time. Could Mick, hurry up with the sink, will you? So all that, well, that got me going, you see. And then meanwhile, my brother, he used to imitate my mum and dad. Right. So my brother, he was very good in our bedroom when we shared it. He would like put on a little act where he'd imitate my dad going, never let me see you doing that again. So we both sit up in bed and we'd both be going, never let me see. And that got me thinking that you can write down what people say. It's kind of obvious in a way, but we keep getting dragged into this righty way of writing. But in actual fact, you can write whole loads of things that are just about the way people speak. It's not as if we're short of language, is it? And so my brother taught me that. And he was also reading to me some very funny books about a schoolboy called Molesworth, which is a bit like the Adrian Mole books. And I loved those. And my brother used to read them to me in bed. Yeah. Oh, Molesworth one, you must learn the value of spiritual things. Or this, Hello clouds, hello sky, said Fotherington Thomas. Anyway, that sort of stuff. And it's a bit like Simpson Hargreaves, really. And so that was got me into writing as well. That's a very long answer to your question there, Oliver Twist. I'm sorry about that, but there you go.
We've got quite a few more questions, so
yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Christine Spain.
Can we get Christine up, Will?
Well, if not, was it easy or notoriously difficult to get your first book published? Were there setbacks? Yeah, it was quite difficult. The very first book was a play, actually, and in fact, the publisher approached me because the play went on in London. But the next book, I did take it around to lots of different publishers. It was the book that eventually became Mind Your Own Business. I don't think I've got a copy here. Mind Your Own Business. And it did go to various publishers. You heard about Margaret Meek earlier. I knew her as Margaret Spencer, same person. And she helped me to get that published by showing it to a wonderful lady called Pam Royds, at a publisher at that time called Andre Deutsch. And then they had this great idea of meeting somebody called Quentin Blake. And so that first book, Mind Your Own Business, by Michael Rosen, illustrated by Quentin Blake, came out in '74. And that's partly thanks to Margaret Meek, but very much to do with Pam Royds, who liked the poems. So, but it was very difficult. It was very difficult. You have to, in fact, one publisher, who shall be nameless, saw the poems and said, children don't like poems written from their point of view. I thought, really? That's funny, because there's Robert Louis Stevenson, A Child's Garden of Verses. There's A.A. Milne, when we were 7, when we were 8, and so on. I thought, why is she telling me that when it's not true? Anyway, so there were setbacks. Yes. There we are, Christine.
Fiona Claxton. So perhaps we'll just read the questions if it's quicker than Michael. Yeah. What are your top tips for hooking in reluctant readers?
Reading out loud and stopping and saying, I'm not going to read you anymore. So if you want to know any more, you've got to read it for yourself. Showing a bit of a clip of a film and then saying, if you want to know more, it's in a book. I'm not going to show you the rest of the film or the video, whatever. Getting children to read and perform things. So obviously whole stories are quite difficult, but obviously there are poems. Get a whole class doing On the Ning Nang Nong by Spike Milligan, you know, to show them it's great fun and you can bang and bash, or you can dance, you can do sad things, you can do movements to go with poems. You know, if you've got the seashells on the seashore, you know, that sort of thing, then you can sway to things. And you can mime poems as well. You can play a game where you mime a poem and then the others have to guess what the poem's about. And then you read the poem out and you say, oh, right, now let's play another one. You can write riddle poems. You say, okay, choose anything you like in the world and then say what that thing can see, can hear, can think about, dream about, can hate, can love, can remember, can imagine. And then you write a thing. So if it's, say, a clock, what can a clock see? What can it hear? So you think of a specific clock, like a clock tower in your village or in your town or whatever. What can it see? What can it hear? What does it dream about? What does a clock dream about? There we are, it's a lovely idea. What does a clock hate? Maybe the clock hates rain because it might rust up its works. I don't know. So you write it and then you say, who am I? And then everyone else has to guess. So you create games and so on. I mean, the Victorians had wonderful things to encourage children to read. Rebuses, where you make pictures halfway through. So you say the boy sat on the, and then instead of writing the word, you do a picture. So you have those. They had riddle me rees, you know, riddles that where my first is in this but not in that. My second is in this and in that, and those sorts of games. I don't know why we lost some of this playing around in the nice way. There's all sorts of things the Victorians did that were brilliant at encouraging children to play with words. You can see Lewis Carroll with the 2 Alice books. He's building on that idea that words for children can be playful. And in fact, you know, you think you know what they mean, but they might not mean what they say. You can say what you mean and mean what you say. It's 2 different things. And you can make up words like Humpty Dumpty shows. You can sit there. So, you know, people made up the word Brexit Well, we can make up other words like that. They're officially called blends, but in Alice, I think he calls them portmanteau words. And we need to revive all that word play and so on to encourage children to be at home and confident and enjoying these things, that the world of language is not something you should be intimidated by, but that you can live in and wear and play with, just like you play any game. It's either a game or indeed play freely, where we, do things with like trial and error without fear of failure. That we should have that sense that language is our resource. I've just recorded a program about weather language for word of mouth, and it's just, we had such fun just playing around with the things we say that use weather language. It's just the moment you occupy it, you suddenly think, oh, this is fun. And then you start thinking the fact of how they say things in other language. It rains cats and dogs, we say. The French say it rains ropes. Il pleut des cordes, they say in French, And you
frogs in some places.
Yeah,
Michael,
exactly.
you've written a book about play and playfulness, haven't you?
Yeah, it's called.
Perhaps tell people what that's called, then they can look for it.
Yeah, cunningly, it's called Michael Rosen's Book of Play.
Huh.
But I really should do. In fact, I think I will be next year. I'm going to be writing a book about language play. So that one, Michael Rosen's Book of Play, and also a book about how to be sort of curious, more curious than perhaps we are, with my book called Good Ideas. So yes, I've written a couple of books about how to be playful and questioning in general, but including language. Yeah, so those are already out, and that one will come out later.
Okay, so just to say that we're coming up to the last 5 minutes, and I've got 2 more questions, and I would like to end with a reading as well. And of course, don't go away, because there's a giveaway at the very end too. But perhaps we could just have some quick answers to these 2 questions. Kiran Sati says, what's the best thing about writing a story for you?
Definitely not the process. It's not that the process isn't fun. It's just the process is a little bit painful, because you're working quite hard and there's no reward. There's no reward at all. You haven't got satisfaction of you going to yourself, yeah, I've really got it there, because you're not quite sure. So it's full of doubt and expectation, unfulfilled sort of ambition, if you like. And it's really when it's finished and you start beginning to get back from readers, whether it's your editor, Chloe, or someone else saying, yes, you've got it, or not. And then you've got to go back and then try again. And then hearing from children. There's one kind of writing that is immediately therapeutic, and that's, if you like, therapeutic writing. So I've written about how I've been ill, and I did a book about it. And those poems I wrote in order to feel better. And I was the audience. So if I was authentic to what I felt like coming out of a coma, and I got it right, then that made it easier on myself, and I felt better. I wasn't concerned about whether anyone else read it. It was only later down the line, some people read it and were quite interested. But actually, so that's a different kind of writing. But story writing, you don't know until you start hearing back from editors, critics, and then your audience. Yeah, but the process.
Question from Nathan Corbett. What top advice would you give to anyone looking to get into writing?
You must read enormous amounts. There's no getting away from it. This is your, whatever you want to call it, your bank, your resource, your bag of stuff. The more you read, the more ideas you get, the more sense of what works, whether it's a rhythm of a story, a poem, a play, a sense of possible themes, even if, not necessarily because you imitate it, but because it'll spark stuff off for you. And I often think that there is one way of thinking about the way in which literature or all arts develop, is that there are pioneers who show us what is possible. So if you just think with painting, it's kind of obvious, isn't it? Along came some people who said, you don't actually have to paint outlines to everything. You could do smudgy things to give you an impression, and they became the Impressionists. you see. Well, it's just the same with writing. You can open Dickens and think, well, Dickens writes in sentences, and you open the first 2 pages of Bleak House, and there's a thing that sounds like a kind of modernist poem from about 1912 with a description of fog. I mean, just have a look at it. Just go back tonight, just put it in the computer, Bleak House, first page, and look at the paragraph that begins fog, and say it out loud to yourself, and it reads like something that could have been written either yesterday or sort of when they started the revolution in literature. These are people who are pioneers who show what you can do next. So, you know, when you read widely, you suddenly see things. You know, I mean, Shakespeare was an incredible experimenter. You find stuff in those soliloquies and things that are just incredible bits of experimental writing, and it might suddenly just trigger off something. And so there's no way around that. Obviously, fill your life full of experiences and all that stuff, but actually, when it comes to writing, it is a very artificial process. So it's not natural. So you might result in writing that feels natural, but the trick is to immerse yourself in the kinds of, you know, find film scripts, see what it is, the way film scripts work, if that interests you. You know, how do they, what does a film script look like even? See what I mean? So experiment. Yeah, definitely.
Wonderful. Michael, did you pick a third book to read from?
I think you said we were going to have a little go at Don't Forget Tiggs, did we?
We could do that. Before we do that reading, though, I would love you to tell us, because I love Bilal's Brilliant Bee.
Oh, yes.
So tell us a little bit about it, and then we can hear from Tiggs.
Oh, we can do Bilal's Brilliant Bee then. Yeah. So Bilal's Brilliant Bee, that started off a bit sort of weird, and then Chloe kind of brought me a little bit down to earth with it. It did start off with a talking toe. I might try Chloe again and see whether I could introduce the talking toe. I think she thought it was just a bit weird. But the boy in the story, I've forgotten what he was called at that point, was learning some secrets from his toe. But we kind of came down to ground a bit. So, and then we had Bilal, and I was thinking about schools and tests and all that sort of thing. And I always love to try and take the mickey out of these things a bit. So it began like this. Bilal was in terrible trouble. It was the test, not the test. Yes, the test, not just any old test. It was the special head teacher's test. This is how the head teacher's test worked. On Monday, Bilal's teacher, Ms. Hopeful, told the class a whole load of stuff to do with Henry VIII. Picture of Henry VIII, 6 wives. On Tuesday, Miss Hopeful told the class a whole load of stuff to do with spellings. On Wednesday, Miss Hopeful told the whole class a whole load of stuff to do with times tables. On Thursday, Miss Hopeful told the class a whole load of stuff to do with bones. On Friday, the head teacher, Mrs. Frown, came into Bilal's class and asked them all a load of questions about Henry VIII, spellings, times tables, and bones. This was the test. So there we are. That's the opening of this. And poor Bilal, he finds out that he doesn't really know any of the answers. And I asked the question, nothing at all? Nope, nothing at all. He thought he was the only one who didn't know the answers. So Bilal was feeling awful. Bilal was feeling desperate. Bilal was feeling very, 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 very sad. End of chapter 1. So there you've got that classic opening to a story. Somebody once said, in a rather sexist way, all stories begin with a man up a tree, and the rest of the story is how does he get out the tree? Not strictly speaking, absolutely true, but this story begins with Bilal up a tree that he can't answer the questions. So how's he going to find out how to answer the questions for the test?
Can I just say to all the wonderful, wonderful teachers that are listening this evening, read Bilal's creative answers, and you will all have had children that come up with answers that are so much better than the ones that are expected from the test. And that's what we get here. It's lovely. It's lovely. Michael, can I thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to launch Rigatoni the Pasta Cat this evening. but also to talk about Bilal's brilliant bee, barking for big bagels, choosing crumble, don't forget Tiggs, Fluff the farting fish, Hampstead the hamster, and Burping Bertha. Thank you very much to our lovely audience for joining us and for asking those questions.